The modern world thrives on constant stimulation. Every direction one turns, there are flashes of color, enticing sounds, and crafted messages designed to tug at emotional strings. The advertisements on billboards, the perfectly lit photographs of meals on menus, the carefully chosen thumbnails on streaming platforms, all share the same intention, offering a fleeting moment of satisfaction that quickly fades, leaving behind an empty space that begs to be filled again. The cycle repeats endlessly, and large corporations have mastered the art of feeding this loop, earning unimaginable profits from a public conditioned to chase small bursts of pleasure over and over again. Without a deliberate strategy to resist, individuals risk surrendering their autonomy, becoming dependent on external cues to dictate their decisions. Like puppets guided by invisible strings, this constant push and pull creates a dangerous maze, one in which people search for fulfillment but are deliberately led in circles. Instead of finding long-term satisfaction, they spend years drifting from one stimulus to another, unable to escape the lure of the next quick fix. The scale of the issue is staggering. Data shows that the typical person spends about 3 hours every single day staring at their smartphone screen. Over the course of a year, that adds up to more than 1,000 hours devoted entirely to tapping, swiping, and scrolling. Time that could have been invested in building skills, strengthening relationships, or pursuing meaningful goals. This slow erosion of time and attention is one of the major reasons motivation fades and addictions grow stronger. Fortunately, there is a method that offers a path back toward control. It is called dopamine fasting, and while the term might sound unusual, the principle behind it is grounded in both science and behavioral change strategies. Before understanding how this process works, it is necessary to grasp what dopamine itself is and why it plays such a significant role in human behavior. Dopamine is not the chemical of pleasure that many assume it to be. It is far more accurate to describe it as the chemical of desire. It fuels the drive to seek rewards, to explore, to pursue. According to researchers who have studied the brain for decades, dopamine is triggered by new rewards, moments when something feels fresh and exciting. That is why the very first bite of a dessert can feel blissful. Yet by the 10th bite, the sensation fades, even though the taste remains the same. The mind is already wandering ahead, searching for what comes next. Because novelty, not familiarity, is what activates the strongest waves of dopamine release. In a natural environment, this process would encourage exploration and adaptation. However, in the digital age, there is no shortage of new stimuli. Video games offer constant levels and upgrades. Social media delivers endless new posts, and online platforms are designed to refresh continuously, so there is never a moment without something different to consume. This creates a reality where the brain is perpetually flooded with reasons to keep wanting, but never fully satisfied. Hours vanish in the blink of an eye, often spent scrolling through feeds, checking notifications, or hopping between distractions. By the end of the day, there's a hollow sense of regret, a realization that the intention to be productive was completely overridden by impulse. The hobbies, relationships, and goals that once brought excitement begin to lose their charm, because the brain has become accustomed to a constant stream of artificially amplified novelty. This is where the practice of dopamine fasting comes into play. At its core, dopamine fasting involves taking intentional breaks from activities that overstimulate the brain's reward system. The purpose is not to eliminate dopamine, an essential chemical for basic human function, but to reset the mind's sensitivity to it. By stepping away from high-intensity, repetitive sources of stimulation, the brain is given a chance to recover, allowing natural pleasures to feel enjoyable again. The idea began gaining attention in certain technology-focused communities around 2018 and exploded in popularity after articles and discussions highlighted its potential benefits. One of the key clarifications made by experts is that dopamine fasting, when practiced effectively, is not about living as an ascetic who rejects all forms of joy. Instead, it is a targeted approach to reducing impulsive behaviors that sabotage long-term goals. The most effective form of dopamine fasting, sometimes referred to as an updated approach, draws heavily from cognitive behavioral therapy, a form of psychological treatment widely recognized for its success in helping people change harmful patterns. In this context, the method focuses on controlling triggers and altering the responses to them. For example, imagine a situation where a phone emits a notification tone. Instinctively, the hand reaches for it, unlocking the screen to check a message. This is a classic stimulus-response chain. One way to disrupt it is to remove the stimulus entirely, perhaps by disabling non-essential alerts or placing the phone in another room during focused work. Another way is to engage in an activity that is physically or mentally incompatible with the undesired action, such as exercising, swimming, or practicing a skill that requires full attention. Another strategy taken from behavioral therapy is called exposure and response prevention. The concept involves intentionally exposing oneself to a familiar trigger, but resisting the typical reaction to it. If someone habitually turns to certain online content for quick gratification, the exercise would involve viewing the trigger without following through with the habitual response. This requires conscious awareness of the sensations that arise. Tension in the body, rapid heartbeat or restlessness, and learning to sit with them instead of immediately acting. A technique known as urge surfing can make this easier. This involves observing the physical and emotional sensations without judgment, describing them mentally, and allowing them to rise and fall naturally, much like a wave. Over time, this practice builds resilience and reduces the grip that certain urges have on decision-making. The effectiveness of dopamine fasting, when rooted in these behavioral principles, is supported by a significant body of research. Cognitive behavioral therapy, applied consistently, has been shown across hundreds of studies to produce strong results in helping people break free from compulsive habits. The mechanism is not a reduction of dopamine itself, but rather a recalibration of how the brain responds to it. When dopamine levels are constantly elevated by sharp and frequent bursts of stimulation, the brain may adapt by reducing the number of dopamine receptors available. This means that over time, more and more intense stimulation is required to achieve the same level of satisfaction. By stepping away from constant triggers, the brain can upregulate receptor levels, restoring sensitivity. This is why, after a period without processed sugar, a single piece of fruit can taste extraordinarily sweet and rewarding. It is no longer competing against an artificially heightened baseline. The process of beginning a dopamine fast can be broken down into two essential stages. The first is identifying the specific behaviors that are most problematic, those that cause distress, disrupt responsibilities, or create dependency. These might include compulsive eating, excessive use of the internet or gaming platforms, impulsive spending, risky thrill-seeking, substance use, or habitual viewing of explicit material. The second stage is to create a realistic schedule for taking breaks from these behaviors. This does not have to be extreme. For instance, if the main issue is overuse of a smartphone, one might start with refraining from unnecessary phone use for 1 to 4 hours each day, then extend to a full day each week, a weekend every few months, and eventually a longer period once a year. The key is gradual progression, allowing the mind and body to adapt without feeling overwhelmed or deprived. However, simply knowing how to schedule breaks does not guarantee success. The challenge lies in sticking to the plan when temptation inevitably arises. One approach that can greatly increase the chances of success is pairing the fast with intentional routine changes and reward replacements. Consider the example of someone who buys a sugary drink every afternoon. They recognize the negative effects and decide to reduce consumption, but find it difficult to stop. Instead of relying on willpower alone, they can analyze the habit in detail. The behavior consists of leaving their current activity, walking to a specific location, making the purchase, and consuming the drink. Beneath that behavior lies a reward they are seeking, perhaps an energy boost, a moment of relaxation, or a chance to socialize. By experimenting with alternative actions that provide a similar reward, the craving can be redirected in a healthier direction. This might mean replacing the drink with a flavored sparkling water, going for a brief walk, or connecting with a friend during the same break time. Once the true reward is identified, attention turns to the trigger, the event or condition that sparks the craving in the first place. Triggers generally fall into categories such as location, time, emotional state, presence of certain people, or actions that immediately precede the habit. If the trigger is a specific time of day, the individual can anticipate it and prepare a healthy alternative before it strikes. This transforms the moment of temptation into an opportunity for intentional choice rather than automatic reaction. Over time, this process can weaken the hold of the old habit, making it easier to replace permanently. This first stage of understanding dopamine, identifying the role it plays in daily behavior, and learning the methods for regaining control, is the foundation for everything that follows. Without awareness, change is nearly impossible. But with awareness comes the ability to act deliberately, to structure one's environment, and to reclaim the ability to find joy in life's simpler experiences. Once the understanding of dopamine and the nature of impulsive behaviors is established, the next step is to move deeper into the practice of applying these principles to real life. The challenge is rarely in knowing what should be done. Most people have at least some awareness that excessive time spent on stimulating activities, whether it is scrolling endlessly on a phone, binge-watching videos, eating processed sugar, or engaging in other compulsive behaviors, diminishes the ability to enjoy life in a balanced way. The difficulty lies in translating that awareness into consistent action. This is where the structure of a dopamine fast becomes a powerful tool. By setting clear boundaries around certain activities, and by doing so with a specific purpose in mind, individuals can create a gradual rebalancing of their relationship with pleasure and motivation. The process starts with conscious recognition of which behaviors have the strongest grip on daily life. This often requires honest self-observation over several days or weeks. One might notice that every time there is a pause in activity, the hand instinctively reaches for the phone. Or perhaps each time a certain mood strikes, boredom, loneliness, stress, the mind automatically drifts toward a specific activity known to give quick gratification. The more frequently this loop is repeated, the more entrenched the neural pathways become, making it feel almost impossible to resist. Identifying these loops is not about self-criticism. It is about mapping the terrain so that meaningful changes can be made. Once the most disruptive habits are named, the next move is to decide how to limit them without creating unnecessary strain. Many people make the mistake of trying to quit something entirely overnight. While that approach may work for a small number of highly determined individuals, it often leads to burnout and relapse for most. Instead, the idea of a staged dopamine fast is to take temporary breaks from these activities in a way that is sustainable. This might mean starting with short, manageable intervals of abstention and then extending them as tolerance for discomfort increases. The mind, when gradually exposed to the absence of a familiar stimulus, learns to adapt without triggering intense withdrawal-like responses. For example, someone who spends the majority of their free time playing online games might choose to take a break for only a few hours each day at first. During these breaks, alternative activities are planned, perhaps reading, exercising, or engaging in a hobby that has been neglected. These are not simply fillers. They are chosen to provide a healthier form of engagement, ideally one that offers some level of reward or satisfaction to soften the absence of the old habit. Over time, these alternative activities can become rewarding in their own right, restoring a sense of variety and balance to life. The science behind this method rests on the concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change its structure and function in response to experience. By consistently removing certain high-stimulation inputs and replacing them with more natural or less intense forms of reward, the brain begins to adjust its baseline expectations. This can lead to what scientists call upregulation of dopamine receptors, meaning that the brain regains sensitivity to smaller, simpler pleasures. Activities that once seemed dull, taking a walk in fresh air, sharing a meal without distraction, or listening to music without multitasking, begin to feel satisfying again. This is not a coincidence, but a biological recalibration. An important point often misunderstood about dopamine fasting is that it does not aim to remove pleasure from life. Pleasure is an essential part of human existence. The real goal is to restore the ability to experience it without needing constant, high-intensity input. In other words, it is about breaking the cycle where only the most extreme forms of stimulation feel worth pursuing. Once that cycle is disrupted, motivation tends to return naturally, because everyday tasks and goals no longer feel meaningless in comparison to the artificial highs of overconsumption. To reach this point, however, it is critical to understand the interplay between triggers, behaviors, and rewards. A trigger is anything that cues the brain to anticipate a certain reward. Triggers can be obvious, such as a phone buzzing with a notification, or subtle, like a certain time of day when an energy slump usually occurs. Once the trigger appears, the mind moves toward the behavior. Checking the phone, buying a sugary drink, opening a video streaming app. And this behavior delivers the anticipated reward. The repetition of this loop makes the behavior increasingly automatic until it happens without conscious thought. The practice of dopamine fasting seeks to interrupt this cycle at various points, either by removing or altering the trigger, changing the behavior, or finding a new reward to satisfy the craving. Consider a situation where someone drinks multiple cups of coffee each day. The immediate assumption might be that the body is dependent on caffeine for energy. However, closer observation might reveal that the craving often arises not from true fatigue, but from habit. Perhaps every morning at a specific time, the act of preparing coffee has become linked with a sense of comfort or productivity. By experimenting with replacements, such as herbal tea, stretching exercises, or a few minutes of deep breathing. The person can determine whether the need is physical or psychological. If the craving subsides after an alternative, then the reward being sought is likely more about the ritual than the caffeine itself. This type of experimentation is a cornerstone of breaking addictive patterns. It requires patience and a willingness to treat oneself as a subject of observation rather than judgment. Each small discovery about what truly drives a habit becomes a tool for change. And when those discoveries are combined with deliberate periods of abstaining from overstimulating activities, the process of rewiring the brain accelerates. Over time, the triggers lose their power, the cravings weaken, and the need for extreme stimulation diminishes. Another valuable technique in this process is mindfulness, the practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment. Mindfulness plays a powerful role in urge surfing, where instead of reacting instantly to an impulse, one pauses to observe it. This might involve noticing where in the body the urge is felt. Perhaps a tightness in the chest, a buzzing in the hands, or a restless energy in the legs. By naming and describing the sensations, the intensity of the urge often decreases on its own. This is not about suppressing the desire, but about allowing it to rise and fall naturally, like a wave cresting and then dissolving into the sea. The more frequently this is practiced, the easier it becomes to ride out urges without giving in to them. A further layer to sustaining a dopamine fast is to design the environment in a way that supports the desired changes. Willpower alone is a limited resource, but by shaping the surroundings, it is possible to make the right choices easier and the wrong choices harder. This might mean removing certain apps from a phone, keeping devices in another room during focused work, avoiding areas where tempting foods are sold, or placing healthier options in more visible spots. By reducing exposure to triggers, the number of decisions that must be resisted each day decreases, which in turn reduces mental fatigue and increases the likelihood of success. It is also worth noting that not all dopamine-triggering activities are inherently harmful. Many things that release dopamine, such as exercise, creative projects, or meaningful social interaction, are beneficial and support well-being. The aim is not to eliminate dopamine from life, which would be impossible, but to be intentional about where it comes from, choosing activities that provide a balance of challenge and reward, rather than ones that offer instant gratification with long-term downsides, is a key part of this intentionality. The schedule of a dopamine fast can be as flexible as needed, provided it maintains a consistent pattern of reducing exposure to overstimulating behaviors. For some, this may involve daily micro-fasts of a few hours, weekly breaks from certain activities, or extended periods every few months for deeper resets. The exact structure matters less than the commitment to consistently interrupt the cycle of constant stimulation. As the mind adjusts, these breaks can become moments of clarity and renewal rather than periods of deprivation. One of the greatest benefits of successfully implementing dopamine fasting is the gradual return of intrinsic motivation. When the brain's baseline sensitivity to reward improves, it becomes easier to find satisfaction in progress toward goals, even when the results are not immediate. Work that once felt tedious begins to feel purposeful. Physical activity feels invigorating rather than like an obligation. Conversations hold attention longer, and small pleasures regain their sparkle. This shift not only supports personal growth, but also strengthens resilience against future addictive patterns. However, the transition is rarely smooth. There will be moments of discomfort, boredom, and temptation. This is to be expected, as the brain is adjusting to a new way of experiencing reward. During these times, it is helpful to remember that the discomfort is temporary, and that each resisted urge strengthens the ability to resist the next one. Over time, what was once a struggle becomes second nature, and the hold of compulsive habits fades. As the practice continues, many discover that their relationship with time changes. Without the constant pull of overstimulating activities, hours feel longer, days more spacious. There is room for deeper focus, more meaningful connections, and a renewed appreciation for life's subtleties. This is the true promise of dopamine fasting, not just breaking free from harmful habits, but reclaiming the capacity to live with intention and joy. As the practice of reducing overstimulation continues, a gradual transformation begins to take place in how daily experiences are perceived. Activities that once seemed uninteresting can start to take on a richer texture. This is not because those activities have changed, but because the brain's reward system is no longer numbed by constant, intense triggers. A simple meal can taste more vibrant. A short walk can feel grounding, and even basic conversations can hold more depth. These changes might seem subtle at first, yet they accumulate over time, eventually reshaping the way life feels on a fundamental level. This shift is one of the clearest signs that the process of resetting has begun to work. However, this stage also presents unique challenges. The absence of overstimulation can sometimes feel like a void. Without the familiar rush from highly stimulating activities, the mind may search for something to fill the gap. This is why replacement habits play a crucial role in sustaining progress. It is not enough to simply remove a behavior. There must be something meaningful to take its place. When a previously addictive habit is stripped away, the brain has a surplus of attention and energy that will seek an outlet. If that outlet is left undefined, there is a higher risk of falling back into the same old patterns. The art of replacement lies in matching the underlying reward of the old habit with a healthier source. Every habit, even the most destructive, exists because it fulfills some kind of need. Whether it is comfort, stimulation, social connection, or a sense of achievement. The first step in finding a replacement is to uncover what that need truly is. For example, someone who spends hours consuming fast-paced online content might be seeking novelty, entertainment, and a sense of engagement. Removing the habit without replacing it could leave them feeling restless. But if they instead turn to learning a new skill, reading challenging material, or engaging in creative projects, the underlying need for novelty and stimulation can still be met without the destructive cycle. This is where the concept of environment design once again becomes essential. A well-structured environment makes it easier to engage in replacement habits and harder to fall back into old ones. For instance, if the temptation to check social media is strongest in the bedroom before sleep, removing devices from that space and replacing them with a stack of books or a journal can redirect the habit. If the craving for sugary snacks always strikes in the afternoon, stocking the kitchen with healthier options ensures that the new habit is more accessible than the old one. In many cases, the difference between relapse and progress comes down to whether the healthier choice is within easy reach at the moment it is needed. While replacements help, there is still the matter of managing the discomfort that comes with craving. This is where practices like urge surfing show their true value. By treating each craving as a temporary wave rather than an unstoppable force, individuals learn to let it pass without feeling compelled to act on it. The physical sensations that come with a craving, tightness in the chest, quickening breath, restlessness, are often mistaken for signals that immediate actions is necessary. But by sitting with these sensations and observing them without judgment, it becomes clear that they rise, peak, and fade on their own. The more this process is repeated, the less intimidating urges become. Another aspect worth addressing is the role of routine in sustaining long-term change. The human brain thrives on patterns, and once a routine is established, it requires far less mental effort to maintain. This is both the cause of destructive habits and the solution to them. By consciously shaping daily routines to include healthy, rewarding activities, it is possible to make the desired behaviors automatic. For example, scheduling a morning walk at the same time each day, replacing late-night screen use with a fixed bedtime reading ritual, or setting aside a daily hour for a creative hobby can all help lock in the new patterns. Over time, these routines stop feeling like forced replacements and start becoming natural parts of life. The long-term effects of a dopamine reset extend beyond personal habits. As the mind becomes more sensitive to smaller sources of reward, it also becomes more resilient against manipulation. The same marketing tactics and engineered triggers that once felt irresistible lose much of their power. This is because the brain is no longer conditioned to expect constant bursts of novelty and intensity. In a sense, dopamine fasting builds a form of psychological armor. It does not remove vulnerability entirely, nothing can. But it does reduce the ease with which outside influences can steer behavior. There is also a deeper psychological benefit that emerges over time: the return of patience. In a culture driven by instant results, the capacity to delay gratification has become rare. Yet, it is this very capacity that underpins many forms of success, from learning a new skill to building financial stability. When the brain is constantly bombarded with instant rewards, long-term goals can feel impossibly distant. But as the sensitivity to smaller rewards increases, the ability to find satisfaction in progress rather than just in completion grows stronger. A person learning to play a musical instrument might feel genuine enjoyment from mastering a single chord rather than only from performing a full song. This shift in mindset makes persistence much easier. An important consideration in all of this is flexibility. The process of reducing overstimulation is not about rigid self-denial. Life will always contain moments of indulgence, and there is nothing inherently wrong with that. The danger lies in returning to patterns where indulgence becomes the default. The healthiest approach to dopamine fasting allows for occasional high-stimulation experiences, but treats them as deliberate choices rather than mindless habits. In this way, a piece of cake at a celebration or an afternoon of gaming with friends can be enjoyed fully, without reigniting a destructive cycle. As with any process of change, setbacks are inevitable. There will be days when old habits resurface, moments when willpower fails, or periods where motivation fades. The key is to treat these not as failures, but as data points. Each lapse is an opportunity to ask what triggered it, what emotion or situation preceded it, and what might be done differently next time. This approach keeps the focus on learning rather than punishment, which is far more effective for long-term progress. Over time, the frequency and intensity of these setbacks diminish, replaced by a growing sense of stability. It is also worth mentioning that the benefits of a dopamine reset are not confined to those struggling with severe addictions. Even people who would not consider themselves addicted can find value in stepping back from overstimulation. The principles work on a spectrum. Whether the issue is mild distraction or deep compulsion, reducing the frequency and intensity of dopamine spikes allows the brain to function more smoothly. The result is often greater focus, more consistent energy levels, and a stronger connection to personal values. As sensitivity to natural rewards increases, a kind of mental clarity often emerges. Decisions that were once clouded by impulse become easier to evaluate. Without the constant background noise of craving, there is more mental space to consider long-term consequences and to align choices with true priorities. This clarity can lead to shifts in life direction, changing careers, ending unfulfilling relationships, or pursuing goals that had been postponed for years. It is as though a fog has lifted, revealing a landscape that was always there but rarely noticed. A fascinating aspect of this process is how it changes the perception of time. Without constant digital or sensory input, moments stretch out. Waiting in line or sitting quietly becomes less uncomfortable. This is partly because the brain is no longer conditioned to expect a new burst of stimulation every few seconds. In this calmer state, the mind can wander in a way that is often highly creative. Some of the best ideas and solutions to problems arise during these unstructured, unstimulated moments, when the brain is free to connect thoughts without interruption. Over the months, the cumulative effect of these changes can be profound. Energy levels stabilize, mood swings lessen, and motivation feels less like a rare burst and more like a steady current. The desire to seek out quick, empty rewards diminishes, replaced by a preference for activities that build lasting satisfaction. Relationships may also improve as presence and attentiveness increase. The simple act of being fully engaged in a conversation, without the constant urge to check a device, can deepen bonds in ways that superficial contact never could. None of this is to say that the process is easy. In fact, one of the most difficult aspects of dopamine fasting is that progress can be slow. Unlike the instant gratification of high-stimulation habits, the rewards of reducing them often take time to appear. This delay can be frustrating, especially in the early stages. But it is precisely this shift in pacing that creates the lasting change. By learning to value progress over immediacy, the brain becomes less reactive and more deliberate. It is also essential to remember that the process is personal. What works for one individual may not work for another. Some may thrive with strict, scheduled fasts from certain activities, while others may prefer a more gradual, flexible approach. The important thing is to remain engaged with the process, to continually observe and adjust, and to remember that the aim is not perfection, but improvement. Over time, these improvements add up, creating a new baseline where balance and control replace compulsion. Ultimately, dopamine fasting is not just about overcoming specific habits. It is about regaining sovereignty over one's attention and desires. In a world where countless forces compete for every spare moment of focus, this is no small achievement. By stepping back, creating space, and allowing the mind to reset, it becomes possible to experience life in a way that feels fuller, calmer, and more genuinely rewarding. Sustaining the changes achieved through a dopamine reset requires both ongoing awareness and deliberate reinforcement. Once the brain begins to adjust to a new baseline of stimulation, it is important to protect that balance, because old patterns can easily return if vigilance fades. The environment in which most people live is still saturated with temptations. Digital platforms designed for maximum engagement, processed foods crafted to light up the brain's reward system, and endless opportunities for instant gratification. Without a conscious plan, it is all too easy to slip back into familiar cycles. The difference now is that, after a period of reduced overstimulation, the effects of relapse tend to be more noticeable. Activities that once seemed normal can suddenly feel jarring, overwhelming, or hollow, which serves as a signal that something has shifted internally. To maintain progress, it helps to treat dopamine regulation not as a temporary challenge, but as an ongoing lifestyle choice. Just as physical fitness requires consistent effort rather than a single burst of activity, mental balance depends on regular attention to habits and triggers. This does not mean living in constant restriction, but rather adopting a rhythm that allows both stimulation and rest in healthy proportions. Periods of intense engagement, whether through work, social interaction, or leisure, can be balanced with intentional downtime, where the mind is free from high-intensity input. This ebb and flow prevents the reward system from becoming desensitized again. One of the most effective ways to preserve balance is to schedule routine fasts from particularly stimulating activities. These do not have to be long to be effective. A few hours without screens each day, a full day offline each week, or a weekend away from certain digital platforms every few months can serve as resets that keep sensitivity intact. These planned breaks also reinforce the idea that pleasure does not have to be constant to be satisfying. When high-stimulation experiences are occasional rather than constant, they regain their intensity and feel genuinely rewarding rather than flat and predictable. The role of replacement habits remains vital at this stage, not only for filling the gaps left by reduced stimulation, but also for enriching life in ways that make old habits less appealing. As the brain adjusts to finding enjoyment in smaller, more natural rewards, these activities can become self-sustaining. Physical exercise, for example, provides both a dopamine boost and numerous health benefits, while creative pursuits stimulate the mind without creating the same dependency patterns as digital entertainment. Social connections built on genuine interaction rather than superficial exchanges can also become powerful sources of motivation and satisfaction. Over time, these healthier rewards form their own feedback loops. The more they are practiced, the more rewarding they feel, and the less appealing high-intensity, short-lived pleasures become. This is not because indulgence is inherently wrong, but because the contrast between genuine fulfillment and fleeting stimulation becomes clearer. The brain begins to prioritize experiences that offer depth and long-term satisfaction over those that provide only momentary spikes of excitement. An important factor in sustaining this mindset is adaptability. Life is dynamic, and routines will inevitably be disrupted by travel, changes in work schedules, or personal events. The ability to adjust without abandoning the principles of balanced stimulation is what allows long-term success. If a period of life demands more engagement with stimulating environments, such as a busy professional season or a series of social commitments, deliberately increasing recovery periods afterward can prevent desensitization. Conversely, during quieter phases, it may be possible to lengthen the breaks and deepen the reset. This adaptability also applies to how one handles setbacks. Even with the best intentions, there will be moments of overindulgence. Instead of treating these moments as failures, it is far more effective to see them as reminders of the importance of balance. Observing the emotional and physical aftermath of overstimulation can reinforce the motivation to maintain healthier patterns. Often, the contrast between the steady satisfaction of a balanced lifestyle and the agitation that follows overindulgence is enough to restore commitment without the need for harsh self-criticism. Mindfulness continues to be a powerful ally in this maintenance phase. By remaining aware of internal states and external triggers, It becomes easier to catch early signs of imbalance. A creeping sense of restlessness, irritability, or diminished enjoyment of normally pleasant activities can signal that stimulation levels have crept too high again. At such moments, scaling back temporarily can prevent a full relapse into old habits. The more attuned one becomes to these signals, the less effort it takes to stay balanced. Another sustaining factor is clarity of purpose. While the initial motivation for dopamine fasting may have been to break free from a specific habit or addiction, maintaining the practice is easier when it is tied to a broader vision of life. This could be the desire for greater mental clarity, deeper relationships, improved physical health, or the ability to focus on meaningful goals without constant distraction. When the process is linked to personal values, it shifts from a restriction to a choice, one that aligns with the life one genuinely wants to live. Social support can also strengthen long-term adherence. Sharing the journey with others, whether through informal conversations or structured groups, creates accountability and provides encouragement. It also reduces the sense of isolation that can sometimes accompany lifestyle changes. Even if friends or family members are not following the exact same path, explaining the reasons for certain choices can help them understand and respect those boundaries, making it easier to maintain them. The benefits of sustained dopamine regulation reach beyond personal well-being. In professional settings, improved focus, patience, and decision-making can lead to higher quality work and reduced burnout. In personal life, a greater capacity for presence and appreciation can enhance relationships. Perhaps most importantly, the regained sensitivity to smaller pleasures fosters gratitude, which in turn supports resilience. When fulfillment can be found in simple moments, a shared meal, a quiet walk, a creative breakthrough, it becomes harder for external circumstances to completely undermine well-being. It is also worth recognizing that the process of maintaining dopamine balance may evolve with time. What feels challenging in the early stages may become second nature after months or years, freeing up mental energy to focus on other aspects of personal growth. At the same time, new challenges may emerge as life circumstances change. The flexibility to adapt the principles of dopamine regulation to different phases of life ensures that it remains a useful tool rather than a rigid rule. Over the long term, the practice can even shift one's relationship with ambition. When the brain is no longer driven primarily by the pursuit of constant novelty, goals can be approached with greater patience and depth. Success is measured less by how quickly it is achieved, and more by the quality of the process. This mindset supports sustainable achievement and reduces the risk of burnout, as the drive to progress is balanced by the ability to rest and recover. In some cases, the process of sustaining dopamine balance can lead to profound lifestyle changes. Careers may be reshaped to reduce unnecessary stress and increase meaningful engagement. Living environments may be simplified to minimize constant sensory overload. Social circles may shift toward people who support and share similar values. These changes are not always immediate, but they tend to emerge naturally when the mind is no longer clouded by compulsive stimulation. A final point to emphasize is that the ultimate goal of this process is freedom. The freedom to choose how to spend attention and energy, rather than being pulled automatically by impulses engineered by external forces. The freedom to enjoy both stillness and excitement without being dependent on either. The freedom to live in a way that feels intentional rather than reactive. In a world where countless systems are designed to capture and monetize attention, maintaining this freedom is an act of personal sovereignty. By the time this stage is reached, the changes may feel less like a deliberate practice and more like a natural part of daily life. The constant background hum of craving has quieted, replaced by a steadier rhythm of engagement and rest. The mind is clearer, the body more in tune, and the capacity to appreciate life's smaller moments has deepened. There will always be temptations, and there will always be moments when stimulation levels rise above the ideal. But the skills and awareness developed through the process make it far easier to return to balance. In this way, dopamine fasting, when understood as the strategic reduction of overstimulation rather than the elimination of pleasure, becomes more than a tool for breaking specific habits. It becomes a framework for living in a way that preserves motivation, enhances well-being, and strengthens the ability to pursue goals without being derailed by short-term impulses. The simplicity of the practice is part of its power. By stepping back from the constant flood of artificially amplified reward signals, the brain remembers how to respond to life's natural rhythms. And in that remembering, there is a return to a more grounded, fulfilling way of being. Ultimately, the journey is not about rejecting modern life or cutting out every source of excitement. It is about creating a relationship with pleasure that serves long-term growth rather than undermining it. When that balance is found and maintained, the benefits ripple outward into every part of life, making it possible to move through the world with both clarity and joy. The external world may still be full of noise, but internally, there is a steadiness that allows one to navigate it without being swept away.